Hi there and welcome back to the channel. For this tutorial, we'll be making the super easy top down in the round sweater. Now, I've actually made this pattern before. However, the one that I had made was a raglan, and I think that the sizes were quite limited. So I thought maybe I'd go ahead and make this top down in the round. And I've worked it two ways. Here you see the one that's in acrylic, the sweater, and I've got the top on my right that I worked in cotton. I personally love cottons for my summer tops, so that was the idea behind this tutorial, was that you could make this pattern for both your winter sweaters and your summer tops. Using acrylics for your winter sweaters and cottons for your summer tops, it just changes the feel of the same pattern. So we'll be working this pattern based on body measurements, and as we go down the yoke, we'll work increases, and once we get to the separation between the armhole spaces and the front and back body, we'll work a chain under that armhole. Now that chain will loosen up on the fit of the body and sleeves. Now with the yarns, I'll be using 100% acrylic for this tutorial, but if you plan on using cotton yarns, use the same weight as I have, which is a double knit or a category 3 or light worsted. Keep in mind that cotton yarns behave differently from acrylic yarns, but as we get into the tutorial, I will explain what's needed to be done. So let's talk about the materials. I'll be using 100% acrylic yarn, and this is a category 3 light worsted. It's a double knit, and each skein is 100 grams, and the recommended hook here is a 4mm hook. Now I'll be changing yarn as I go along, so I'm working with the same color in 2 different shades. You'll need a pair of scissors, a yarn or wool needle, a measuring tape, and a 5mm crochet hook. Getting on with the tutorial, with your choice of yarn, form a slip knot. Chain a length of chains. Now this length of chains is for the neckline of the sweater. We will work the sweater from the neckline going down the yoke and down towards the body of the sweater. Continue on until you have a length of chains, and at a point you will take your chain and with holding both ends together, you will fit it over the head. So without stretching on this chain. So this chain must be able to fit around the head without being stretched. Now I've worked my length of chains and I have 80 chains. So just to talk a little bit more about this chain, if I go ahead and open up on that chain and I take a measurement on my chain, I get 21 inches or 53 centimeters. That's for those 80 chains that I had worked. Now, the actual circumference of my head is 22 inches, so it is just about right. I'm happy with that. The stretch on the yarn will account for that extra inch. Now let's look at what happens to cotton yarns. Here I have chained 80 chains on this cotton double knit category 3 light worsted yarn. So it's just the same weight as my acrylic yarn, and you can see that the length on my cotton chain is much longer than that of the acrylic chain. So we know that working the same number of chains on a different type of yarn will not give me the same result. What I love doing is taking both ends, holding them together, and fitting the chain around the head without stretching. Make sure that you do not stretch on it. The stitch pattern that I'm using is the Trinity stitch, and that does tend to sort of tighten up on the yarn. Here I have my length of chains, and for this tutorial I'll be working a sample. For my actual sweater I worked 80 chains. Join the first and last chain by slip stitching. To do this, make certain that this entire chain is not twisted. And this is the way that I go about doing that. So to slip stitch, you'll insert your hook into the first chain, you'll yarn over and pull that loop through both loops on the hook. We will be working single crochets for our first round. So it's chain 1 into the same stitch from where the chain 1 comes out of, single crochet. So that's insert your hook into the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over and go through both loops on the hook. Continue on with single crochets into all chains to the end of the round. I've continued on working those single crochets for round 1. And before I can complete this round, I need to make certain that my stitch count is in an odd number. Now, I've counted my chain beforehand and I had 80 chains, so I know I've already got 80 stitches. So I'll work one more stitch to bring it up to 81 stitches, that odd number I'm looking for. So you'll work 2 stitches into your last stitch to bring your stitch count to an odd number. To complete the round, into that first stitch, slip stitch to join. I'll be changing my yarn as I go through this pattern. I'll be using 2 different shades. If you are not planning to do the same, you will just continue as normal. If you are changing colors, bring in your change of color, form a little loop and pull it through the hook once you've completed round 1. Round 2, chain 1 into the same stitch from where we've chained 1, single crochet. We will now work the Trinity stitch. And the Trinity stitch is worked using 3 unfinished single crochets. Into the same stitch from where we've single crocheted, insert your hook and pull up a loop. Insert your hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop. Insert your hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop. You now have 4 loops on your hook. Yarn over and go through all 4 loops on the hook. Chain 1. So into that same stitch from where we finished our first stitch, insert your hook, pull up a loop, insert your hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop, insert your hook into the next stitch and pull up a loop. You have 4 loops on your hook. Yarn over and go through all 4 loops on the hook. Chain 1. Into the same stitch from where we've completed our last stitch. Insert your hook, pull up a loop. Insert your hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop. Insert your hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop. Yarn over and go through all 4 loops on the hook and chain 1. Continue on working the stitch pattern to the end of the round. I've worked my way to the end of round 2 with 2 stitches to go. So into those last stitches, I'll work one more Trinity stitch, starting my stitch from that last stitch that I've worked. And you'll see here at the end of this Trinity stitch, I will not chain 1. So this is the only time when working the Trinity stitch, you will not chain 1. And that's the last stitch at the end of the round. So to complete this round, slip stitch to join. It's important to also keep track of which side you're working your rounds on. All round 2 repeats must be worked on the right side. Round 3, chain 1 and turn. We're now working on the wrong side. So all round 3 repeats will be worked on the wrong side. Into that same stitch from where we've chained 1, single crochet. Continuing on with the Trinity stitch pattern, into that same stitch from where we've chained 1, insert your hook, pull up a loop, into the next stitch, insert your hook, pull up a loop, into the next stitch, insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over and go through all 4 loops on the hook and chain 1. For the Trinity stitch, always work your first stitch into the same stitch from where we've ended our last stitch. Continue on with the stitch pattern to complete the round. So just a little tip when working this Trinity stitch, you'll notice that when we insert our hook into the 3rd stitch, we're always inserting it into the chain 1 from the round before. And here you can clearly see your chain 1s from the round before. Here they are. You'll be able to notice them easily. So when you work your Trinity stitch for the 2nd round repeat, remember it takes 2 rounds to complete the full Trinity stitch. So you'll insert your hook into that first stitch, and it's always the one where we've ended our last stitch. Insert your hook into the 2nd stitch, and then that 3rd stitch is always the single crochet from the round before. So I hope that helps when working the stitch pattern, or rather helps you keep track of your stitch pattern. Continue to the end of the round. I've continued on with the stitch pattern. Here I am at the end with 2 stitches to go. So right at the end, I'll work a Trinity stitch. Only this time, I will not chain 1 at the end. So with 4 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through all 4 loops, and then slip stitch to join. If I turn to the right side, you can clearly see the stitch pattern. It takes 2 rounds to complete the Trinity stitch pattern. So that's going to be our round 2 and our round 3 repeats. And if I turn over to the wrong side, the Trinity stitch pattern hasn't really formed. So it's important to turn after every round. Now at this point, I do want to go ahead and change the color of my yarn. So the way that I'll do it is I'm just going to pick up on that change of color and bring it forward. There is no fastening off and cutting off excess yarn, and that's just my way of avoiding weaving in tail ends at the end. I'm not sure how you feel about tail ends, but really that's the worst part of crochet for me. So I've chained 1 to bring in my change of color, and then you'll turn. We're now working round 4 into the same stitch as chain 1, single crochet. So round 4 is an increase round. We will be working increases into every 3rd stitch. That first single crochet counted as our first stitch. Work the next single crochet, and then for our 3rd single crochet, we'll work an increase into that stitch. So we're working 2 single crochets into 1 stitch. Continue on working single crochets and working increases into every 3rd stitch. I've continued on working those single crochets. I've worked an increase into every 3rd stitch. At this point, you can go ahead and count the number of stitches, making certain that it's an odd number. If you have an odd number, slip stitch to join like I am doing here. And if you don't have that odd number, work one more stitch into your last stitch before slip stitching to join. Round 5, chain 2 and turn. Chain 2 counts as our first stitch. We are now working on the wrong side. So for this round, we're working double crochets all across. So to work a double crochet, it's yarn over, insert your hook into that stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. Continue on with double crochets into all stitches. I've worked my way to the end of round 5. To complete the round, into that second chain from chain 2, slip stitch to join. And this round 2, 3, 4 and round 5 is basically the stitch pattern for this entire sweater. You will repeat these rounds throughout the sweater. For the yoke, you will continue to work increases. For the body and the sleeves, there are no increase rounds. It's just 2 rounds of the Trinity stitch, followed by a round of single crochet and then a round of double crochet. Now for round 6, I plan on changing colors. I'll pick up on my change of color, bring it through, and that's my chain 1. So if you aren't changing colors, you'll chain 1 and then single crochet into the same stitch as chain 1. And for this round, I'm repeating round 2. Here are the armhole depth measurements. Use the measurement for the size that you are working. You will need this measurement to continue on with the pattern. Remember, you can always pause the video to jot down the measurement that you need. I've continued on to complete the yoke for my size, and all I've done was repeat round 2, round 3, round 4 and round 5. Now the only change that I've made was when it comes to that repeat of round 4. For round 4, I worked an increase into every 3rd stitch, and then when I repeated round 4 again, I had worked an increase into every 4th stitch. And then for my next repeat, it was an increase into every 5th stitch, and then an increase into every 6th stitch, and then an increase into every 7th stitch. So by increasing this way, the yoke gets wider. So you work as many increase rounds as need be, and you'll like if you've worked your increase after every 7th stitch, then for the next increase round, work it into every 8th stitch, and so on until your yoke measures the correct armhole depth for the size that you are making. Now I'm making the sweater for myself, and it's a size medium. The armhole depth for a size medium is 7.5 inches, but if you look here, my yoke measures 8 inches, and that's because I ended this yoke on a round 2 and round 3 repeat. You can have your yoke slightly longer than the armhole depth, but it cannot be shorter than the armhole depth measurement. Make certain that you end your yoke with the Trinity stitch repeat. We will now form the armhole spaces and the front and back of the sweater. Before marking out the armhole spaces, you need to find your center back. The center back or center front runs straight down the yoke, and you can use your start as the guide for your center back. Both halves of the yoke need to be equal. For the armhole measurements, you do need to take one measurement, and that's of the arm measurement. Make certain that when you're taking this measurement, you are taking a tight measurement. My arm measurement is 11 inches or 28 centimeters, and that was a tight measurement that I had taken. So I'll subtract 1 inch, I'll bring it down to 10 inches, and then I'll halve 10 inches. So I've now got 5 inches of that arm measurement. Using half of that measurement, from the edge of my yoke, I'll measure inwards and I'll mark off that measurement using stitch markers, marking off both layers of my yoke. I'll do the same on the other side. You can go ahead and count the number of stitches that you have for your armholes, making certain or adjusting them so that they are the same. Now don't worry about that tight measurement. As we work the body, we will work a chain under, and it will sort of increase the measurement on our sleeves and on the body. Round 1 of the body, continuing from where I had stopped, and here I'll be changing my yarn. So I'll just pick up on my next color, bring that through. So it's a chain 1 and turn into the same stitch as chain 1, single crochet. Continue on with single crochets to the first stitch marker. I've worked those single crochets, and here I am at that first stitch marker. Into that stitch marked by the stitch marker, single crochet, chain 5. Now this chain 5 is optional. You can work as many or as little chains as you'd like, and that will either tighten on the sweater or loosen up on the sweater. Skipping all those stitches in between the stitch markers into your second stitch marker, single crochet. Rather into the stitch marked by the second stitch marker, single crochet. And here you have your first armhole space. Continue with single crochets to the next stitch marker. Now just to talk a little bit more about that chain. Yes, you can work as many or as little chains as need be. So here for my sweater, I worked 5 chains, and actually I regretted not working more chains as I would have liked a looser fit on it. But when I went on to work this top in my cotton yarn, I didn't work any chains because when I fitted on the yoke, there was no need to work chains. So I just continued on joining from stitch marker to form that armhole space with no chains in between. So the best thing to do is to fit on the yoke and see the way that it fits, and then you decide on the number of chains that you need to work. Okay, so continuing on, I'm at the next stitch marker. I've worked those single crochets. I've worked a single crochet into the stitch marked by the stitch marker. Then I'll chain the same number of chains as I did for my first armhole space, skipping the stitches in between, and into my last stitch marker, I'll work a single crochet to form the second armhole space. And here you have it. So you'll work the same number of chains for both the armhole spaces. Then it's single crochets to the end of the round. I've continued on completing round 1 of the body. To end the round, I slip stitched to join. Now at this point, I'll go ahead and count the number of stitches and chains and make certain that my stitch count and my chain count is an odd number. Round 2 of the body, chain 2 and turn. Here we'll be working double crochets into all stitches and into all chains. So I've continued on. I've completed the yoke and the body of the sweater. All I've done was repeat round 2, 3, 4, and 5 with no increases for the body. Be sure to turn after every round. For round 2 of the body, I worked those double crochets into those chains under the armholes as well. I continued on, and once I got to the length that I wanted my sweater at, I fastened off and cut off the excess yarn. We will now work the sleeves. Attach yarn to the underarm at the armhole spaces. Chain 1. And here we finished off on our yoke with the round 2 and round 3 repeat. So our next round will be a round of single crochets, and then it's a round of double crochets, and you'll continue on from there, working your stitch pattern just as you had done for the yoke and the body. I've continued on with the sleeve. It was the round 4 repeat, and then I worked round 5 repeat, and then it was round 2, 3, 4, and round 5 until I had the right length that I was looking for my sleeve to be at. Now, if you do want to taper off your sleeve, at the elbow, you can go ahead and change the size of your hook. So you'll drop your hook down one size, and then as you get to the bottom of your sleeve, you'll drop it down again to the next size. So you'll move from a size 5mm hook, and then it's a 4mm hook and a 3mm hook. So I went ahead and changed my sweater into a peplum sweater because I simply cannot get enough of peplums. And the way you work a peplum is the same as I had worked the yoke with those increases. I worked my sweater to just below the waist, and then I worked increases for those increase rounds, the rounds of single crochet. So for my first round, I had worked an increase into every second stitch. So that means I worked a single crochet and then I worked an increase, a single crochet and then an increase, and then I worked my round of double crochets, and then it was my round of Trinity stitch, and then I worked my next increase round. For my next increase round, I worked my increases into every third stitch. So that means I worked 2 single crochets and then an increase, and then I just continued on with rounds 2, 3, 4, and 5 without any increases to complete the peplum. You can then fasten off and cut off the excess yarn. Now all that's left to do apart from working another sleeve is to weave in all these ends. When weaving in the ends, go back and forth into the stitches. The whole idea is to lose those ends into the fibers of the stitches. So that's it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy my content, please do not forget to subscribe.